Great. Hello, it's good to see everyone here today, and we're really glad to be with you. I'm Robin Davis Sakula. I'm Vice President of Communications and Marketing here at the Presbyterian Foundation. I am a ruling elder and member of Highland Presbyterian Church in Louisville, Kentucky. I had my own marketing firm for about 15 years before joining the foundation in 2019. We're here today to talk to you about year-end giving. This is something that, of course, is predictable, but there are some things that you can do to make it a little easier on yourself. And if you serve a church, some things you can do to encourage year-end giving in your own congregations. So we want to start here with the theological foundation and a devotional. Reverend Jihan O is going to be doing that devotional for us. She serves as Mid-Council, as the Director of Mid-Council Ministries for the Office of the General Assembly for the Presbyterian Church. She's a teaching elder, member of Greater Atlanta Presbytery, and a member of New Covenant Trust Company's Board of Directors. We're really glad to have you with us here today. Please take it away, Jihan.
Thanks, Robin. And as we're in the second week of Advent, heading into the third week of Advent, looking at what it means for us to have joy in the context also of giving, I thought that we might encounter God's word from 2 Corinthians 9, 7 through 12. A familiar passage for many folks. Here's what it says. Each of you must give as you have made up your mind, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to provide you with every blessing in abundance, so that by always having enough of everything, you may share abundantly in every good work. As it is written, He scatters abroad, He gives to the poor. His righteousness endures forever. He who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way for your great generosity, which will produce thanksgiving to God through us. For the rendering of this ministry not only supplies the needs of the saints, but also overflows with many thanksgivings to God. As I was reading these words, I was reflecting on the context of when Paul was writing this, that he has sent some folks ahead of him to collect a generous offering that has been promised by the church in Corinth. And he says that he's sending them ahead so that they may be prepared to give the generous offering. And so one of the things I think am thinking about as I'm reading this is this aspect that there is an aspect of preparation and of preparing hearts, minds, our own spirits in order to actually give generously and voluntarily, and not by extortion or reluctantly or under compulsion, as Paul says. There are also a couple of other pieces that sort of jump out at me from this passage. It's this piece about always having enough of everything. So it doesn't talk about that we are only able to give generously because we are already overflowing, but that because we have sufficiency, because our needs have been met, then we're able to share abundantly in every good work. Another piece, I think, here for me is that you'll be enriched in every way for your great generosity. So it doesn't say that you'll be enriched because of your great generosity, but you'll be enriched for generosity, so that when God is gifting us with goods that we are to steward, that it's really so that we can be generous with the things that God has given, and that it's really a way of us sharing our thankfulness and our joyfulness and our thanks, of really our gratitude to God. And so it's really this way of generating more and more gratitude, that the gratitude is the thing that will overflow through those who are working. And that seems really important in this time as we're running around in this season of Advent, but also in this sort of season of preparing for Christmas, that there's often the sense that of being harried and feeling like there's also, when we're thinking about giving, and that there's a sense of obligation or duty that often sort of takes center stage sometimes in the ways that we talk about it, but really it's about gratitude and thanksgiving, and that it's about recognizing that our needs have been met and being thankful for God's presence and providence for us. So just thinking about those aspects. I would love to close with prayer. Let us pray. Eternal God, as you led your people in ages past, you direct our journey into the future. We give you thanks that you came to us in Jesus Christ, and we eagerly await his coming again, that his rule may be complete and your righteousness reign over all the world. By your Spirit, open our eyes to the generosity of your hand, the overflowing of the gifts that you have given to us, and nurture our souls in all spiritual gifts. Fill us with gratitude overflowing, that we may share life and love and praise to you. God of all the ages, in the gracious name of Jesus Christ, your Son, by the power of your Holy Spirit, now and forever we pray. Amen.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your words as we enter into this season of generosity. Our next speaker will be the person who will help walk us through some of the giving vehicles that are available to you. We hope that you'll find this to be to give you some maybe new ideas, and also walk you through how to do some of these things that you might like to do to be generous. Greg Russo will be our next speaker. He is president of New Covenant Trust Company and executive vice president and chief operating officer of the Presbyterian Foundation. He is a certified public accountant and a certified financial planner, and a graduate of The Ohio State University. So Greg, go ahead and take it away.
Hey, thank you, Robin. Hope everyone is doing well. I'm excited to be with you, excited to share some information with you. Sometimes some of this information can be a little bit dry. So, Robin, if you see anybody kind of dozing off, just jump in and chime in with any comments or anything. But we'll move through this. And can you believe it? It's December 6th already. Time is flying by, and we're already in the last month of the last quarter of the year. And if we can go to the next slide, that really means a lot from a giving perspective. If you look at giving by month, the majority of giving, probably no surprise, happens in the last quarter of the year. 30%, 37% of giving occurs in the fourth quarter. And December is the largest giving month by far out of the whole year. So over 20% is given in the month of December. So it is a time to really focus and close out the year strong from a giving perspective. So before I dive into some vehicles, I want to maybe provide some context with where we are and some considerations. So if we go to the next slide, the first consideration I'd like us to consider is the economy. And I think we're all aware that inflation has been extremely high. It's set some decade high records. Inflation has. Stock market has had a challenging year. Year to date, it's down. We have wars. We have economic uncertainties going on. You have the Federal Reserve, continuing to raise interest rates and a means to fight inflation. All those things create a lot of economic pressure. And that economic pressure can make people feel like they have less when inflation is going up, that they have less disposable income, which could make the amount of gifts, the dollar amount of gifts, actually not grow like it has in the past. But people's impulse to give, it's always there. People are always looking for something to give to. And in times like these, when there is economic challenges, economic uncertainties, people focus more on prioritizing where to give. And so it's important that if you are serving a church or a ministry, that you really get your story out there, that you tell your impact to help people prioritize and think to give to your organization. The last thing to remember is, if I were to give $1 last year and I give $1 today, that dollar that I give today is actually worth less to the charity because of inflation. Its purchasing power has declined. So as donors consider gifts, they should consider purchasing power and consider what inflation has done to that purchasing power. The next slide that I'd like us to consider before we get into a couple of giving vehicles is some demographic changes. And this might influence the way that you communicate or the way that we connect with people. Millennials recently have surpassed baby boomers as the largest generation. Over 72 million millennials are out there now. And interestingly enough, millennials identify themselves as philanthropically motivated much more so than baby boomers. That doesn't mean that they give more today than baby boomers do, but it does mean they have a charitable mindset. So where they may not have the capacity of baby boomers today, they are willing to give and they are willing to engage in a charitable manner. The thing that's coming, though, and you've probably heard us talk about this before, is this intergenerational wealth transfer. And this is where wealth is being transferred from one generation, like the baby boomers, to the millennials. And they're forecasting over the next 20, 30 years, $70 trillion. Can you believe it? 70 trillion is going to move from baby boomers to that next generation. So as we engage millennials today, and we should know that they will inherit a lot of wealth in the next 20 to 30 years. And in fact, millennials that become millionaires most likely will become millionaires because of inheritance. So it's important to remember that. Most of that wealth transfer will not be in cash. It will be in other assets like appreciated securities, real estate, business interests, those kinds of things. And baby boomers right now are deciding how this wealth is going to be distributed. So it is important, as we think about it, not for year-end giving, but for the future, as we talk about planned giving, to engage baby boomers so they remember us and our charities during this wealth transfer. So if we go to the next slide, I want to introduce our first year-end giving tip. And so I have 4 of these I wanted to share. The first one is appreciated securities. And what I mean by appreciated securities are gifts from stocks, bonds, and assets other than cash, like real estate. And what might be interesting to you is these kinds of gifts, these appreciated securities gifts, are actually about 100 times larger than cash gifts. So they are much, much larger. One of the reasons they're larger is because of the tax benefits realized by donors. Donors have a potential to make a gift in appreciated stock. And if they do that, that capital gain from what they paid for it to what they gifted it to has the potential of not being taxed, that capital gain. They also get the benefit of a charitable tax deduction of the market value of that gift. So there are several benefits for the donor. And the benefit to the charity is a lot of times, most of the time, it results in a significantly larger gift than cash. But you might be thinking now, okay, you just said earlier that the stock market's down for the year. It's down substantially. So are there really appreciated securities out there? Well, if we go to the next slide, you'll see, yeah, in fact, the market has declined in 2021. The market is hovering. This is the S&P 500. The S&P 500 is hovering right around 4,000 right now. But really, we only need to go back to early 2021, where the market was below 4,000, below current levels. So within the last 2 years and more, there are appreciated securities. And more than likely, donors have appreciated securities. So we should be talking about appreciated security gifts. Just because the market's down doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about them. If we go to the next slide, you'll see something that I think is interesting. It's interesting to me anyways, that when you look at average net worth of a household in America, you'll see 100% net worth, 89% of those assets of the net worth is not on deposit, not in cash deposits. 11% of our net worth on average is in our bank accounts. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that if you think about your congregation, what do we typically ask for? Well, we ask for cash deposits, don't we? When we pass the plate, we ask for cash or a check, or if we do online giving, we ask for credit card or an ACH debit to the person's account. Those are cash gifts. So typically congregations are asking for cash gifts. That is by far the smallest piece of the net worth that an average family or an average person has. So we're actually asking for the smallest sliver of somebody's net worth when we're asking just for cash gifts. On top of that, with inflation, like we said earlier, people are feeling less secure from an income perspective. So not only are we asking for the smallest sliver, people are also seeing that sliver decline because of inflation. Prices are going up, their income may not be going at the same rate. So it is a great time to think about asking people to give appreciated securities, to give out of their wealth, out of their net worth. So it can provide many benefits, again, to donors from a tax perspective and also from a charity, in that it allows donors to rethink about their net worth, not just income, and give appreciated securities. So the next slide talks about how do you accept appreciated security gifts. The first thing to know is they take more time. This is not something where someone can write a check on December 31st and get a year-end gift in for 2022. It takes time. And typically what we recommend is middle of this month, mid-December, you have to have that process started of transferring that appreciated security. So now is the time to start communicating with people to say, if we're going to accept appreciated securities, that you can in fact accept them, but now's the time to get that process started. It's important to know that that donor has to transfer that security in kind. They can't sell it and transfer cash. They have to transfer that security in kind to get those tax benefits. So a charity has to have the ability to receive in-kind security transfers, a custody account, whatever it may be, to receive those. And if they can't, please know that the Presbyterian Foundation can help with that. We have the ability to accept those in-kind security transfers, liquidate those, and get the cash to the charity that donor wants that cash to go to. So that's tip number one, appreciated securities. Year-end giving tip number two is donor advised funds. Donor advised funds for many years now have been the fastest growing charitable giving vehicle by far, by a long shot. They are growing fast. And if you're not familiar with donor advised funds, it's a vehicle in which a donor irrevocably transfers assets to a charity like the Presbyterian Foundation, and then that donor retains advisory control or recommendations over that donor advised fund. They can recommend how that donor advised fund is invested. They can recommend where to make grants. Donors can, recommend grants out of principal, out of income. They can recommend grants to various charities, and they don't have to grant it all out at one time. They can take a year or two actually to grant money out of a donor advised fund. There are tax benefits that when I make a gift to a donor advised fund, that is a tax deductible gift. So if we go to the next slide, a lot of times, this slide shows the growth of donor advised funds, and it is astounding to see. You can see almost a 40% increase in the market value of donor advised funds, up to $234 billion. You can see grants out of donor advised funds, $46 billion coming out of donor advised funds. Gifts into donor advised funds, $72 billion. Payout rates, a lot of times people wonder, do people give to donor advised funds and those assets just sit there? Well, absolutely not. You can see in 2021, 27% of the assets given into donor advised funds were subsequently granted out. So a lot of activity, a lot of good activity going on in donor advised funds. If we go to the next slide, I wanted just to share one other factor as to why donor advised funds might be increasing as much as they are. The standard deduction on tax returns for individuals and joint filers have increased dramatically over the last 6 or 7 years. Tax Act, I think in 17 or 18, really dramatically increased the standard deduction, and it's continuing to go up. If you itemize, you know that your itemized deductions have to be greater than the standard deduction in order to get credit for your itemizer, in order to reduce your tax income. If it's not, you use the standard deduction. Charitable contributions are considered an itemized deduction. So if I give money to my charities, but it doesn't exceed the standard deduction, it's not tax deductible. I take the standard deduction. So if we go to the next slide, what this allows, what donor advised funds allow us to do is that we can bunch our charitable gifts together. So let's just say right now, this year, I bunch the gifts that I am going to give over the next 2 years. And if I'm able to do this, I give that amount into my donor advised fund for this year. That allows me to itemize that deduction, take a greater deduction than the standard deduction to reduce my taxable income. Next year, and I wouldn't have been able to do that unless I bunched my deductions. I would have taken the standard deduction, so I would have had a higher taxable income. Next year, I don't make any charitable contributions. I grant everything out of my donor advised fund, so I take the standard deduction. So the way it works is I'm able to minimize or reduce my tax liability to the greatest extent by bunching my contributions into a donor advised fund. That again allows me to make grants this year, next year, the year after. It allows me to make grants to my church, to other charities that I'm interested in. I can grant my principal, my income, whatever it may be. And it does, in fact, allow me to satisfy personal pledges. The IRS has a notice out there that it says that you can. It's subject to certain qualifications. We can discuss that with you if you have interest. But it is something that allows me to satisfy my pledges. The thing I want to make you aware of, because of those staggering numbers of 40-some billion dollars being granted out, most likely you have folks, or even you have a donor advised fund. A lot of people don't equate granting money from a donor advised fund to their congregation or to their charity. And it's very important for you to know that let's make people aware that for your congregation, for your ministry, for your program, you can receive donor advised fund grants. So when you ask people for year-end gifts or any gifts throughout the year, don't just ask them for a check or an appreciated security. Also ask them about donor advised funds. Say, hey, we can accept gifts from donor advised funds. More than happy to accept a grant from a donor advised fund. The thing to remember is how you acknowledge that grant and thank for that grant is different than what you would do if it was a direct gift. The foundation, we have some samples of some great ways to acknowledge and thank for donor advised fund grants. But again, just to reiterate, remember, ask for grants from donor advised funds. So that's the second tip. The third tip is a little bit more involved. It's called a qualified charitable contribution. It's also a QCD. Some of you may have heard about this, and I'll kind of go through it quickly. There's a lot to it, but I tell you, there are huge benefits to qualified charitable distributions. As you probably are aware, people have a lot of money in individual retirement accounts. A lot has been put in there. A lot of people are depending on that for retirement. And as you probably also know, distributions from traditional IRAs are treated as ordinary income from a tax perspective. So it goes into your adjustable gross income and it is taxed at ordinary income rates. The IRS recently, moved the required minimum distribution age to 72. So that means if you're holding an IRA and if you have one, by the age of 72, you have to start withdrawing a certain amount out of your IRA, treat it as ordinary income. I can make gifts out of my IRA distributions, but that's treated as a charitable contribution that's subject to that itemized deduction and standard deduction limitations we talked about earlier. So the question is there a better way to gift out of your IRA? And the answer is absolutely yes. There's huge benefits to it. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that we can make something called a qualified distribution. And what it is you really want to do it out of traditional IRAs because that money comes out as ordinary income, is taxable. Doesn't really make sense to do it from a Roth IRA because that money comes out as tax-free money. A qualified charitable distribution, a QCD, fulfills your required minimum distribution. So essentially, if I have an IRA and I have to take a required minimum distribution this year, I can do a QCD instead and not have that required minimum distribution be included in my adjusted gross income. We'll talk about that in a minute. The maximum qualified charitable distributions I can do in a year is $100,000 per person per year. And actually, I can start it before I'm required to do a minimum distribution. The Secure Act, which moved the RMD to 72, didn't touch this. So I can start making qualified distributions out of my IRA at 70 and a half years old. Also, I can make qualified charitable distributions that are greater than my required minimum distribution. So if I'm only required to take $5,000 this year, I could do a $10,000 qualified charitable distribution to my charity. So let's talk about a little bit more of the reasons or the mechanics behind this. Let's go to the next slide. So a qualified charitable distribution, I mentioned earlier that a required minimum distribution goes into adjusted gross income. A qualified charitable distribution does not touch adjusted gross income, does not touch taxable income. It's excluded. What adjustable gross income determines on your tax return are things like personal exemptions, itemized deductions, and if it is included, if this amount is included, it could phase out certain exemptions and deductions, but by excluding it, it could prevent that phase out. So it increases some tax benefits for you. It also, your adjustable gross income determines your taxes on Social Security income. It can also impact your Medicare premiums. So by excluding our IRA distributions from adjustable gross income, we can maybe reduce taxes on Social Security income and possibly lower our Medicare premiums. So a huge benefit by doing a qualified charitable distribution. Again, it can exceed our required minimum distribution. A very important point, though, is that distribution out of your IRA cannot come to you, couldn't come to me, and then I can't write a check to my charity. I can't do that because all of a sudden the IRS then says, hey, that's yours, it's taxable. It has to go directly to charity. I can't touch it. Also, a qualified charitable distribution can satisfy a pledge as well. If we go to the next slide, what I would say is, make sure donors know about this gift type. As we're sitting in our congregations, there's a lot of folks that are probably considering required minimum distributions. Make sure folks know you can accept these, just like with donor advised fund grants. Make sure people understand this is available to them, and there's huge benefits to making a gift like this. This gift, like appreciated securities, can take time. It's not something you can start on December 30th. Now would be about the time to get going on this. If you want to do a qualified charitable distribution, get that going. Talk to your IRA custodian, let them know where to send this gift. And mentioning that There are some IRA administrators and custodians that are not that familiar with qualified charitable distributions. So you may want to have somebody from the Presbyterian Foundation, a legal or financial advisor with you to make sure they understand you cannot see or touch that check. It has to go straight to the charity. And last, we can help if needed. So obviously reach out to the Presbyterian Foundation. And let's go to the last year-end giving tip, and this one will be brief, and it's not really about money now, it's money for the future. But we mentioned this intergenerational wealth transfer going from the boomers down to the next generation. And interest in planned giving is growing. It's growing dramatically. People more and more, and I'm not sure if it's because of the pandemic or just general demographics, but people are thinking about their legacy more and more. They want to make sure that what they're remembered for is what mattered to them. And planned giving is a great way to do that. You know, I say it's your last will and testament, it's your last will, it's your testimony. And when you give your assets at death or through your estate plan, that's your testimony. People can remember that. The IRS data reflects that charitable requests are 3 times larger than lifetime annual giving. 3 times larger. The largest gifts charities typically receive are from planned gifts. And when people commit to planned gifts, their annual giving goes up as well. So it is very important to remember planned giving. A great time to remind people about planned giving is when they make a current gift. If we go to the next slide. So as you receive year-end gifts and you send out your gift acknowledgement, you send out your thank you letter, put a sentence or 2 in there about planned giving. Remind people that it's a great time to consider a planned gift. Reference that their peers are making planned gifts. There was a study done a few years ago that when a study was, when nobody asked somebody about a planned gift, 5% of the people did a planned gift. When they said, when they asked them to make a planned gift, 10% did. And then when they said, well, would you like to make a planned gift? And you know that your peers are making planned gifts and remembering us in their estate plan, 20% actually made a planned gift. So that's important. Let them know that you're accepting planned gifts and that their peers are making planned gifts. And as we said before, it speaks to someone's legacy. So it's a great time at year end to remind people of planned giving. So in summary, what I'd like to close out with is we talked about the economic challenges out there, inflation, the pandemic still is, kind of winding down, but there's still some supply chain things going on, inflation, the Federal Reserve. Don't let that deter you though. People are still philanthropic. People are still making gifts. What matters now more than anything though, is to make sure you tell your story, make sure you communicate your impact, that you have a passion about what you're doing. And also what's important is that that person makes a gift with the right asset and the right vehicle. People can maximize their giving by making appreciated securities gifts, grants from their donor advised funds, qualified charitable distributions. So it does matter if it is the right vehicle and the right gift asset. Also know that we're here to help, the Presbyterian Foundation. We have tremendous ministry relationship officers all over the country. If we go to the next slide, you'll see them. They are skilled in all of these different areas. We also have back office expertise related to this. So if you have questions from a donor perspective, from a ministry perspective, I hope you call us. I hope you reach out to us because we would love to work with you. So those are my comments, Robin, for today.
Thank you so much. I heard a lot of really interesting things in your presentation. One of those was that 74% of millennials identify as philanthropically motivated, which I find really fascinating. And one of the things that made me think about was when you were talking about planned gifts. I know that a lot of people think of wills and estate plans as something that older people create. However, I created my will when my oldest daughter was born. And there's a gift for my church in that will. Now, hopefully they'll have to wait a long time to get that. But it is something that you need to give some thought to if you think of that as something only for the older generations in your church to consider. You want to stop thinking in that way if you can.
Yes.
Hey,
Robin.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to add on to that, studies are showing that more and more assets are not transferring via will. More and more assets are transferring in pay on death provisions in IRAs, 401ks, checking accounts, life insurance, trusts, whatever it is. So don't just think about wills, but also think about those other financial assets that people might have.
Yes, and some of those can be much simpler.
Yes.
To deal with, particularly life insurance, naming, a beneficiary as your church or another ministry that you love. That's a much simpler process than going to an attorney and setting up a will. So yes, sometimes they can be very simple. And I also thought about your point about the market being down, so we don't tend to think of securities gifts. But you're right, that trajectory over the past, whatever, 8 or 10 years has been very strong. And what has happened most recently, yes, has taken some of that away. But it's very clear. I mean, that money on that chart from 2017 to now has almost doubled.
Yes.
So, and a lot of folks had money in there long before that.
Exactly.
So they've seen some really strong gains, and that's a way that people can definitely contribute. One thing to note too is if you are planning on making a stock gift, as you mentioned, get that going sooner rather than later. There are a couple of things about that. It takes time. It takes time to get a hold of whoever your agent is who's going to sell that stock for you. And also you have to remember that a lot of folks, including probably your stockbroker, are going to take some time off. And so you need to get that ball rolling. And also, if you are making a gift through the foundation, we would always stress to let us know when you're going to do that. We don't really like to have a stock gift show up and not know who it's from, where it's supposed to go. We love to have some instructions with that. That could be very helpful.
Great, good points.
Yeah. Thank you for walking us through all of that. The next person who I want to introduce is Joseph Moore, because I think Joseph Moore has a great story about donor advised funds. And as Greg mentioned, donor advised funds are becoming more and more popular. And Joseph is a ministry relations officer here for us at the foundation, and he's in the South Central region. He lives in Colorado. As a ministry relations officer, he works with congregations to create cultures of generosity. He offers seminars and workshops, and he also works with individuals who want to be generous. And Joseph is an ordained teaching elder. He has been a pastor, which I think is particularly helpful in his work. And so the story that Joseph shared with me about his donor advised fund is about how he uses it to teach generosity in his family. So I'm going to let Joseph tell us that story now.
Well, thanks, Robin and Greg, for inviting me to share just for a brief moment how donor advised funds have really made a difference in my own family. I mean, Greg outlined the ways that donor advised funds can be used to support the charities and congregations that those grant recommendations are made for. But in my own life, it's actually made a pretty profound difference just in the giving culture of my family. So my wife, Shelley, and I have 3 children from 15 years old to 8 years old. And full disclosure, I set up my donor advised fund about 3 years ago simply because I knew it would force me to be a little more disciplined in my charitable giving. And so I had no sort of higher value in setting up my donor advised fund, but I knew I could have my paycheck deducted and it would go into the fund, and that at some point the funds in there would need to be used. And so there was very much a practical component to setting up my donor advised fund. I also appreciated the simplicity of really getting one receipt a year for all of my giving. So we decided we were going to run all of our charitable giving through that. We were going to be disciplined. We'd take a set amount each month, and we thought this will be great. It was easy to make gifts from. There's an online form through, I use the foundation's donor advised fund, but there's lots of them out there. But with ours, it was very easy to make grant recommendations. And so kind of all the practical stuff was fine. But what I didn't know is it would create these amazing conversations with my kiddos. The first unexpected one was when you set up a donor advised fund, it's actually tied to the market, or it can be tied to the market. And at the foundation, I think we have 9 or 10 different options. And so we got to talk with our kids about how we were going to invest the funds that were in our donor advised fund. And in our case, we chose a couple of socially responsible funds. And all of a sudden, there's this investment conversation that's happening with our kids that we were not expecting to have. And so we told them, hey, this is a pool of money that we are going to use to give back and to support things that we think are important. We named our fund the More Family Foundation because we thought that was fun and sounded important. But the investment piece was an unexpected thing for us because we got to talk with our kids about why we thought, in our case, that socially responsible investing mattered. And so that was kind of the first unexpected thing. The second one was it really developed into a family practice for us to about once a quarter, we'll sit at dinner one night and we'll just talk about what do we want to support this quarter. I mean, they know we support our church regularly, but the sky's the limit in terms of really any other registered charity. What do we want to support? And our kids know that at least 4 times a year, we're going to talk about that. And that's part of one of the things that we think it means to be a More. My last name is More. And so our children are growing up really through using this portal, this donor advised fund, knowing that one of the things that Moors do is we make grant recommendations. And that was an unexpected piece, kind of this family formation piece. And if I think a little bit longer term, one of my favorite things about donor advised funds is they can be passed down to the one generation below you, and then you can list a beneficiary for any funds that are left after that. And so Shelley and I know that our kids are going to receive at least some inheritance that has some responsibility with it. They're going to have to, after we die, like Robin said, hopefully many years from now, they're going to have to give away those funds. And so they're not just going to receive an inheritance of resources that they can do what they want with. They're going to receive an inheritance, at least some portion, that they've got to give away. And we think in terms of legacy and values transfer, that's really important. And again, that was unexpected 3 years ago to think that all of those things were going to happen, from setting up this easy way to kind of manage charitable giving that has really turned into more of kind of a discipleship and family formation tool for us. So I would encourage, if you've got questions about donor advised funds, both on the sort of receiving end, like Greg talked about, but also how you set them up and how you use them. They're really easy, they're really effective, and in our case, they've been great fun. So I think there's going to be a time for questions later, certainly if there are questions. But Robin and Greg, thanks for letting me share a little bit today.
Thank you so much, Joseph. I love that story. And I think that's one thing that those of us who are parents, I have 3 daughters, I always want to be talking about ways to give back. I want that to be one of the hallmarks of our family. And I love this as a way that you can involve your children and guide them and show them what generosity looks like, and that it's a family value. So I really appreciate that story. We're at the point now when we've presented all of our content. I wonder if there are any questions. Nathan, I was looking at the chat. I don't see anything. Have you seen any questions or chat?
There have not been any questions or in the Q&A feature or in the chat. So if you have any questions, you can click on the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and type in your questions.
And this may be the kind of thing that you think, I don't have any right now, but I might. So if you decide down the road that you have questions that you wish you had asked, this is streaming on YouTube and you can watch it again on YouTube. We also will be doing a story about it that we'll publish on our website. And it does look like we have a question, so that's great. Oh, someone says this was very helpful. Great. Thank you, Doreen. We're glad you could join us and really happy to have you with us. And we also do have year-end giving resources on our website. The other thing that I would encourage your ministry relations officers, these are very skilled and knowledgeable regional folks who work for us. They're all over the country, and they can help both churches, ministries, and individuals with ideas for being generous. Sherry Kenny has weighed in and says it was excellent and she loves Joseph's story. We're not surprised. We love Sherry. Sherry worked for the foundation and she was a much loved member of our staff. Thank you, Sherry. Dave Gale wants to know if we can get a copy of the slides used in the presentation. Absolutely. We will push out an email to everyone who registered for the webinar today. And we will include in that a copy of the slides so that you can have another look at those. I don't see any other questions, but oh, okay. Steve Kelly comes in with a question. Thank you, Steve. How can a donor advised fund continue my giving to support my church after I'm gone? Greg, would you like to take that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Robin. Good question, Steve. Yes, so when you set up a donor advised fund, you can set up provisions for how that fund will be treated after your passing. And as Joseph indicated for his family fund, he set up a provision where his kids then can make grant recommendations after he passes. You can also essentially have it turn into a permanent fund if you would like. You could set up provisions in your donor advised fund that after the last advisor passes, that it will, create a permanent fund. So that is possible to do, Steve. And again, work with us, work with your ministry relations officer to get that set up.
Gary Kenny would like to point out that you can make a bequest in your will to your DAF, which is a good point. Thank you, Sherry.
Very good point.
Yeah, you can also, while you can't do a qualified charitable distribution to a DAF, you can actually send your IRA or proceeds from your IRA to a DAF. You just can't do the QCD kind of really important work that Greg talked about. So that's another way that you can fund charitable giving after you die as well.
Yeah.
Good point.
We hope that we can continue to be a resource for you personally, for your congregations, for ministries that you serve on the board of. We hope that you will think of us if you're looking for investment needs. We are always happy to talk to people out there in the church and beyond about the services that we have, particularly New Covenant Trust Company. You can reach out to Greg, you can reach out to me, and we'll be here to point you in the right direction, if nothing else.
Right.
So really happy to have everybody here today. Okay, so we have a question from Bradley Hume. Thank you very much. He says, an excellent program, succinct and helpful. I don't think I've ever been accused of being succinct, so thank you. Can we get a copy of this video, not just the slides to use for charitable giving at our church? Absolutely. Bradley, this video is being broadcast live on YouTube right now, and once it has concluded, it will post there. That will be on the Presbyterian Foundation account. When we push out the email after this is concluded, we will include the slides, and we will include a link to this video if you would like to watch it again. So I don't see any other questions, so we're going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you. Please reach out to us if we can help you. An easy way to reach anybody here is to email serving@presbyterianfoundation.org, and we will route your email to the right person. So thanks to each of you. Thanks to our presenters today. Thanks very much to Nathan Young for being our guru behind the camera and helping us get everything set up and run our Zoom for us. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Merry Christmas.